His voice was in my head. He said he was Martin Luther King. And he said, so you're going to sacrifice yourself tonight and you're going to be an angel. Didn't remember my name at all. Didn't know who I was. If that would have continued, I'm not even sure I would have been here today.
At age 23, I think it's age 23, you that's around the time you were sectioned.
Yeah.
I read that you hailed a taxi and it was ultimately the exchange with the taxi driver.
I mean, that was an extraordinary, and again, it was the voice of Martin Luther King that was in my head. You hear voices when you one of the aspects of psychosis, which is what I suffered from, you can hear voices, have illusions, delusions that seem incredibly real to you. And I was lying in bed and I just heard this voice in my head. Wake up. And I just kind of sat up in bed, looking around the room thinking, where's that come from? And this voice was in my head. It sounds totally bizarre, but his voice was in my head. And he went on to say, look, I don't want to tell you who I am right now because you're going to be really scared. But you have to go to Camden. You have to walk into this store. Don't be surprised if it's open. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't be surprised it's open. Whatever you do, do not turn around. And it was all these things I had to do. Whatever you do, don't do this. Whatever you do, don't do that. But then go into this store, walk to the back of the store. There's going to be one suit hanging up on a rack at the back of the store. You need to put this suit on, and then when you turn around, don't be surprised to find out that it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, I'm going to close the space-time continuum, and we are going to close the gap between good and evil. This whole thing. And he said it ended up being Martin Luther King. He said he was Martin Luther King. And he said, when you, because I played Martin Luther King as a kid, and it was the first acting thing that I'd ever done. And he said, when you played me as a child, I entered your heart. And he said, even though I'm speaking to you from beyond the grave, I need you and 2 or 3 other people in the world to activate something and close the gap between good and evil. And he said, so you're going to sacrifice yourself tonight and you're going to be an angel. And this voice was, I swear to you, was like real in my head. And I'm sobbing in my bedroom, listening to this voice. He said, so tonight's the night. And that was the night I was eventually sectioned. But I got up, got my clothes on, and walked all the way to Camden. Obviously, the shop was closed. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm out of my nut. So, and I was exhausted and I thought, I've got to go home, and flagged a cab down. And I didn't have any money. And I don't remember, I just remember this driver looking around and then the driver pulling over and then lots of flashing lights, obviously the police, and then being in the back of a police wagon and then sitting in a cell. And all this was just, I'm in and out of what seemed like a dream for me. I was in and out of, I remember being in this cell and then going to magistrate's court in the morning and not remembering my name, didn't remember my name at all, didn't know who I was, couldn't remember who I was. And the duty solicitor sort of talking about my mom, and then it said my dad's name was Romeo, and I went, Romeo? Hang on a minute. I played Romeo. David Harewood. I used my sort of career to get back to who I was. Then went to court, and I had no idea what was happening in this court. I mean, the judge was speaking at me and I was just a mess. And I walked out of court, and again, lucky, but some woman who'd been in the court walked out and said, said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't think so. I don't know who I am." And she said, "Where do you live?" And I said, "I can't remember." She said, "What's your nearest tube station?" And I said, "Oh, Highbury, Islington." And she flagged the cab down, gave the driver £10 and said, "Take him to Highbury, Islington." And I got out at Highbury, Islington, walked home, and my friends were waiting for me because they'd been looking for me all night, couldn't find me. And that's the day that they knew something was, even though they'd been sitting with me and visiting me for the last couple of weeks, because they knew something was off. They knew I wasn't well. And that's the weird thing about mental health, or particularly psychosis. You see somebody acting very strangely. Somebody that you love, it could be your son, your husband, your mom, they just suddenly start acting out of character, becoming obsessed with something. Or it's like they suddenly change, and you know something's wrong, but you sort of desperately hoping that they sort of come back. And that's sometimes, they don't, and you have to make that call to have them sectioned. And luckily for me, my friends had been there, because if they weren't there, I think I would have been in real trouble. I would have been in real trouble. If that would have continued, I'm not even sure I would have been here today. So I was very lucky.
How long did that process last before you were sectioned, of the sort of gradual deterioration?
Well, I think it was happening for a while, because I remember working and not feeling great. So I'd say at least 2 or 3 months, there was a slow progression of not sleeping, overthinking, trying to hide that, drinking to sort of self-medicate. I knew I wasn't well, but I thought I could handle it.
I'm trying to understand how much of that you believe is a physiological, biological situation, or maybe predisposed by biology, versus circumstance, experience, and the things that you'd been through. I
think, and again, when I'm reading, speaking to the consultant who was working on my documentary, it's a combination of both things. Your propensity, the chances of you having a breakdown are sort of reliant on levels of stress, lack of sleep, what's called ACEs, which are these fundamental, like people who experience trauma in life. I mean, for me, I think it was my parents' divorce, and not dealing with that at the time. So much of it has just been squashed, not dealing with some of the trauma that was in my life. And I think a lot of it was slowly coming out then, in that one slow progression of being deeply unhappy.
Why? Why were you deeply unhappy? I read that and I thought, what?
As I say, I came out of drama school, and the hostility that I was met with as a young black actor was ferocious. Newspapers, reviews, just dismissing me, completely dismissing me. And I'd sort of left drama school with a bit of heat. People were like, really excited to see what I was going to do. And the school was very, very excited to, everybody was talking about this young kid coming out of drama school. It's going to be, and I just got slaughtered.
All about race.
I played Sloane in Entertaining Mr. Sloane.
Mr. Sloane, yeah.
Who is quite a devious bisexual character. He's actually also a murderer. And I remember there was one reviewer, a black reviewer, who was outraged that I'd taken the part because I was letting the side down. And he said that people should go and demonstrate their disapproval of Mr. Harewood's choice of employment. And I read it, I was like, wow, put that down. And I noticed that night, as Sloane has this really kind of tough monologue, he talks about abusing somebody. And in the middle of this monologue, I saw people get up and walk out. And I noticed that they were black. And then the next night, more black people started walking out. And it was always in the middle of that monologue, black people would get up and walk out. And it was really tough to deal with.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.